Thank you very much, everybody, for attending our webinar. Today, we're here to introduce our partnership between DK2 and STX and open up the world of FuelEU regulations, which has been a challenge for many owners and operators this year, especially compared to EU ETS, which has been part of the maritime regulations for a couple of years now. Now, for those who don't know me, I'm Dipak Karki, MD and founder of DK2. Where we really support debt raising, provide equity, and help decarbonize the supply chain. Now, I'm joined by my friend Venkatesh Natarajan from STX, better known as Vic to his friends. Now, Vic's title is Head of Maritime Strategy and Business Development at STX, and really he's an expert in this FuelEU area. So I'm proud to have built this relationship with him, DK2 and STX, which allows us to help owners and operators navigate these new regulations. Now, these, hopefully at the end of this period, allows our clients to become more commercially aware of their options under the EU rules, but really critically to save money. So, Vic, welcome to the webinar. Why don't you give a bit more detail about you and your background?
Thank you, Deepak, for the kind introduction. I must say finding DK2 and building this strategic partnership has been a real win for STX. And as you mentioned, my name is Venkatesh Natarajan. My background is very much pure play shipping. I spent a couple of years sailing on product tankers before moving ashore. Since then, I've worked or had the opportunity to represent a handful of Nordic and Asian Pacific players on environmental regulations, sustainability, decarbonizations, and the green transition strategies. Also on the commercial side, I'm experienced in tanker markets, shipping finance, and M&A. At STX, I've been responsible for setting up the FuelEU Maritime desk, and today I lead our maritime strategy and business development activities.
Great, thanks a lot, Vic. Now, it's always nice to have somebody who's actually sailed on the seven seas and understands the practical sides. Now, as I mentioned, most of our owners are fully aware of EU ETS now, since they came into effect last year. So why don't you expand upon why the EU brought in FuelEU this year, and from their perspective, why it can be much more expensive than EU ETS?
That's a good question, Deepak. So to be simple, the EU introduced FuelEU Maritime to address something that ETS cannot. So as you may very well know, EU ETS only accounts for emissions on a tank-to-wake basis, essentially what comes out of the funnel. Whereas FuelEU Maritime looks on a broader scope. It's well-to-wake emissions that is being accounted, meaning that the full greenhouse gas footprint of the energy on board that is used. The goal is to close the cost gap between fossil fuels and alternative fuels. So that's one of the reasons the penalty is set so high. It's 642 euros per ton of CO2 equivalent. And it's designed in a way to push the industry towards more consuming more greener fuels rather than simply paying for allowances like what you see in EU ETS. So to put it in simple words, EU ETS lets you offset, however, FuelEU Maritime forces you to act.
So FuelEU is more of a stick, and I suppose from that perspective, 642 euros a ton CO2 equivalent is quite a big number. So we're here to really find out ways of complying, but really without paying this full amount, right? So what are the options for compliance and saving on that penalty?
So EU introduces 3 practical solutions for compliance with the regulation. So first is a direct solution where a switch to cleaner fuels, alternative fuels like biofuels, e-fuels, bio-LNG, whatever works best for your fleet to meet the intensity reduction target, which starts at 2% this year and extends to 80% by 2040. Second option would be to paying the penalty, but obviously that's too expensive and it compounds in later years. The final is a mix of options called the flexibility mechanism, where you can pool with all compliant vessels or use banking or borrowing mechanisms under these options. So what we at STX have seen and experienced in the market is pooling tends to be a more practical and cost-effective solution because you don't need to change your operation to achieve compliance.
Great. So these pools, which are virtual pools, as we know, there's few of them around being set up by managers, and also there's online website portals that almost say they're doing the same thing. So why don't you expand upon why STX is different and why they should partner with us?
So what makes STX different in the market is its scale and credibility. As you may very well know, we are a multi-million euro environmental commodity trader. So that gives us access to multiple arbitrage opportunities and long-term contracts for alternative fuels. So by far, we are the biggest bio-LNG supplier in the port of Rotterdam. So that means we absorb the biofuel or bio-LNG premiums ourselves and secure the rights to the surplus, which we then guarantee to our clients at a fixed price. So what it means for the clients is that they're not left exposed to counterparty risk, because if you opt for a platform as a solution, you got to know who's your direct counterparty. And also they're avoiding shifting prices in terms of volatility or vague promises. So we provide binding contracts, and we are one of the pioneers who designed this in the market, providing an in-house certificate guaranteeing your surplus called GOSA, guarantees of surplus allocation, meaning that we would cover you if we default. So in other words, we also run strict KYC dark fleet checks. We also take Paris MOU into our serious consideration. So STX pool is not just compliant, but it's a clean, transparent, and reliable pool as a counterparty. So in addition to that, we don't rely on other pool members to generate surplus. STX has its own contracted generation options to strategic partners within the maritime industry. That's why we can guarantee the surplus that is being generated in STX pool. It's not about hoping someone else over complies. It's about STX creating that over compliance by design.
Great. Okay. I love GOSA. That sounds great. And it obviously is really good for participants to hear about your process and procedures. So how does the virtual pooling actually work when you are, say, burning biofuels, and how does it benefit owners with FuelEU deficient ships?
As you rightly mentioned, Dipak, the pooling itself is virtual. It's not physical pools, it's virtual pools. So this pooling is designed for owners who can't or don't want to use biofuels everywhere. So it comes with its complications. Maybe it's the engine compatibility, maybe limited port supply, or even the trading patterns don't sort of work for you to bunker alternative fuels. So that is where pooling sort of lets you tap into surplus generated by vessels that already run in these alternative fuels or using greener fuels without you needing to change how you operate today. In simple words, you buy compliance units. We at STX allocate them to your ships in Thetis, and your deficit is covered. It's seamless, and it's often cheaper.
Okay, we'll come back to the cheaper. Now let's talk about, you just mentioned earlier on about the blending of biofuels, which some owners can do. Now, can owners use biofuels and join the pool?
Absolutely. So many owners use biofuels on some vessels and pool the rest of the deficit. So it's fair to say you don't need to choose one or the other. Pooling just gives you an extra lever to balance compliance across your fleet.
Okay, so the fact that obviously there are some clear advantages of using this compliance or buying these compliance units, Vic, instead of burning these biofuels. So maybe you can expand a bit more about that, because I think it's quite an important point.
No, certainly. So with biofuels, you need to think about multiple options in place, the availability, the quality, even the engine warranty or the blending restrictions in certain locations. And most of this supply is in concentrated locations like ARA, Antwerp, Rotterdam, and Amsterdam, or Singapore. So compliance units avoids these headaches, to be honest, because there is no direct OPEX increase, or there is no logistical complications. So you can buy them now, bank them forward, or even trade the surplus that you bought. So it's a straightforward and much flexible option compared to other options for complying with the regulation.
Okay, you mentioned again buying. So if I was going to buy, what decision making has to go through the process to decide how much I want to buy, Vic?
It totally depends on your energy intensity and the volume of your fleet. But what we see at STX in the market is the demand is only going one way, and it's up. So as we get closer to 2025 compliance deadlines, more owners wake up to the penalties and start scrambling for solutions. So at the same time, the supply of surplus through the alternative fuels is getting limited. So right now we see that the price are still relatively low, but once demand accelerates, they'll certainly rise. So it's fair to say that buying early secures your savings.
Well, as you mentioned, there's only a certain amount of surplus units out there, so clearly you should be looking to buy now to make that benefit of making these savings. So once the owner is looking to buy, but really, can you expand a bit more about the reporting, verification, this whole pooling and issuing of the documents of compliance, right, ultimately, and how does that compare to the EU ETS system?
So the timeline and mechanism moreover follows the same mechanism as EU ETS. Whereas in FuelEU, ships report voyages into Thetis throughout the year, and by end of December, the reporting period gets closed. That means by end of January next year, i.e. 2026, the data goes to the verifiers. Once this verified data process is done from the client side, by end of March, the verifiers certify the numbers that's been allocated into the Thetis. So it's April, that is the pooling window or the options that you need to choose in Thetis FuelEU database, which would be your ideal choice for compliance. And by June, the responsible entity, i.e. the ISM manager, would be receiving the document of compliance. So at STX, we walk our clients through the timeline as a step-by-step guidance throughout the compliance process. So nothing comes as a surprise.
Nobody likes surprises, right? Unless it's presents. But now I'm an ex-banker, Vic, as you know. Now I've come from a very regulated market. Now FuelEU is an unregulated market. So how can you trust the system?
It's correct. I often convey this to our clients. So FuelEU Maritime as a policy is regulated, but the market is unregulated. And unlike EU ETS, this isn't a speculative market. So FuelEU trades are contractual, regulated, and auditable in STX. So that's why we have developed dedicated FuelEU contracts backed by our GOSA certificate. So if we default, we pay the penalty on your behalf. So that's the level of security we bring to the market.
Great. I mean, you mentioned you're a multi-million, almost $1 billion company. Now, that means you've got deep pockets, Vic, which is great. But also, I know you've been. I know that STX has been around for over almost 20 years now. So now that's very reassuring. That should give a comfort to everybody that's listening to this. Now, moving on to some more, again, practicalities. Many of our clients employ vessels on voyage or have trip time charters as well. So how does the pooling work if vessels are going through these variety of different employment strategies?
So it purely depends on who takes the responsibility, Deepak. So for instance, in voyage charters, usually the owner pools because they hold the liability. Whereas if you see in TC, it's subject to agreement, but often charters take it because they manage the fuel. That also sort of adds to period charters, typically where charters assume the responsibility. At STX, we broke this down into pieces, and we have structured deals and to sort of fit those commercial realities.
Okay, well, what happens if things change halfway through the year again, in terms of, say, they've bought too much, or they are looking at potentially a vessel being sold throughout the during the year? What happens then?
It's a very practical question. So right now, P&I clubs are waking up to this scenario. But to answer your question, if you end up with extra units, you can bank them forward. However, if you need more units, if you bought not enough, you can always go back to the market and buy more surplus. Coming back to the scenario, if the ship is sold, so if the ship is sold mid-year, the owner still carries the liability on or before 31st of December. So it is this clauses about FuelEU has to be specified in S&P contracts, because paying penalty is obviously expensive, and also it increases by 10% year on year if unpaid. So planning ahead really matters.
Well, let's hope we've got S&P brokers listening in as well, right? Because obviously it's a key issue, this. So moving on to going back to the more practical issues regarding the pool. Now, so how do you ensure the quality of the pool? And as you know, owners are very private here. And so how do you ensure the security of the data of the participants joining the STX pool?
Well, it's good that the anonymity still prevails under the updated regulatory scope of FuelEU Maritime. And we at STX run everything through TETIS and EMSA. So meaning that it's we protect the data of our clients under the scope of the regulation. And also we apply, as I mentioned earlier, stricter KYC requirements that incorporates sanctions, OFAC requirements, and dark fleet checks. So our clients can be more free or relaxed when it comes to joining STX pool, because knowing it's not only clean but also transparent in terms of what checks we conduct, carrying out our clients' expectations.
Great. No, I think that's fantastic to hear that, ultimately what we are seeing is a great counterparty with deep pockets to support the compliance units. So thank you very much for that clarification and insight there. So, but on the regulation itself, what do you see happening with FuelEU going forward?
I mean, it's $1 million question, Deepak, but
you've got deep pockets.
So decarbonization is not going away, to be fairly simple. And FuelEU is just one way of Europe's push towards the sector going into the green transition faster. At the same time, the International Maritime Organization is under tremendous pressure to deliver a global framework, which they did. But whether that would be delayed or diluted remains to be seen with the given threats by few member states. I don't want to mention any names, but either way, compliance costs are rising. Owners who are proactive, who are front runners, and who prepare now with flexible tools like pooling will be in best position to navigate both regional and global regulations.
Great. Listen, Vic, really insightful and showing the options for owner operators to navigate this FuelEU penalty. clearly there are savings to be made under the STX pool, and hopefully people who are listening to this and watching us are clearly wanting to know a bit more of how they can buy. So hopefully they'll contact us and we can discuss this in future. So again, thank you very much, Vic, and I look forward to hopefully having you again on another webinar on further updates. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dipak.